Hey guy, tonight we take a soft woolen step back in time. The kind of time stitched not into grand tapestries or shimmering silk, but into heels worn down by winter walks, and into tiny holes mended with gentleness under the hush of a flickering oil lamp. This isn't the history of empires or battlefields. This is the quieter kind, the kind that happens in laps, the kind that smells faintly of lavender and old wood. Tonight we unravel the forgotten art of darning socks, and, if you're patient, we might even whisper them goodnight. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with your location and local time. I'd love to know which corner of the world this thread of history is drifting into tonight. Now, dim the lights, tuck your toes beneath the blanket, and listen close. Because these socks, they have stories before the modern era, before elastic, before polyester blends, and before washing machines gobbled their pairs. Socks were rare, precious, and oddly poetic. They weren't churned out in identical rows in giant factories. No, they were knit slowly by hand, often by someone you loved, or someone who owed you love. Every loop and stitch was an offering. You didn't just wear socks, you lived in them. You walked the earth in them, and when they tore, which they inevitably did, you didn't throw them away. You replied with a needle, a quiet moment, and a little patience. Wool was common in colder regions, cotton in warmer ones. In both cases, early socks were far from the sleek, stretchy tubes we know today. They bagged, they sagged, they bunched at the ankle like they were trying to hide. But you wore them anyway, because they kept your feet dry, warm, and slightly less miserable than the alternative. And darning. That was how you told your socks they still mattered. Imagine it. A small wooden stool, a single oil lamp glowing like a sleepy firefly, a mother, grandmother, or someone old enough to know better, pulling out a sock that had seen better days. They'd slip it over a darning egg, a small, smooth piece of wood shaped like an egg or a mushroom, and gently stretch the fabric over it. The goal wasn't to erase the hole, it was to rebuild around it. The threads would be stitched in one direction, then woven through in the opposite, creating a tiny patchwork net, a new little floor for your heel to stand on. Darning wasn't about perfection, it was about protection. The sock, like the person wearing it, had walked too far, too fast, or simply too often, and someone cared enough to help it go on. Historians still argue whether socks first appeared in ancient Egypt or Rome. There's evidence of now bending a predecessor, knitting used to make foot coverings over 1,000 years ago. Some say the Greeks had socks made from matted animal hair. Others swear by Viking foot traps. But all agree, socks have always existed somewhere between necessity and love. Even their earliest appearances in literature are oddly tender. A 16th century letter from an English merchant describes his wife's gift of a pair of soft woolen hose, mended at heel by her own hand, that wasn't just laundry, that was affection in looped form. Darning eggs themselves became heirlooms, passed from hand to hand, generation to generation. Some were carved from maple, others from ivory. A few were decorated with tiny painted flowers or family crests. Holding one felt like holding a secret, a spell for keeping things whole. You might think, why all this fuss over something invisible? The holes on the inside of a shoe, after all. But that's the point. This wasn't about display. It was about intimacy, a private repair, a way of saying you walked, and I noticed quirky historians have even documented letters that mention socks being mended as acts of penance, peace offerings, or even courtship. She mended his socks by the fire isn't just a sentence, it's an entire mood. Imagine someone taking the time to stitch over every threadbare patch your life left behind, no judgment, just care. You might be wondering, did people really whisper goodnight to their socks? Surprisingly, yes. Diaries from the 19th century include quiet, almost silly notes like, laid my socks to bed after mending, told them they did well today. One woman in 1840 writes, left the mended pair on the sill to dry, kissed the toes for luck. We laugh now, but isn't there something lovely in that your feet carried you, your socks held on, and in return you gave them a little kindness? The world, even then, was noisy, harsh, fast in its own old way, but darning, that was slow, gentle, a resistance to waste, a kind of ritual softness that we've nearly forgotten. So, as you nestle deeper under your blanket and let your eyes drift close, imagine a pair of hand-knit socks worn, yes, but cared for, tucked neatly beneath your bed, warm, whole again, and waiting for tomorrow's steps. You wake up before dawn just like your grandmother did. The fire's out, the coal's cold, and the kitchen smells faintly of last night's stew and damp wool. There's a breeze sneaking through the cracks in the shutters, and it kisses your ankles like a reminder. It's time to mend. On the stool by the hearth sits a small wicker basket. Inside the sock pile, a soft, tired tangle of heels and toes with ambitions of warmth. Some are yours, some are your father's. One, you think, may have belonged to your cousin, who vanished west with a bookkeeper and never sent the last rent payment. His sock stayed behind. Each sock tells a story, not all of them glamorous, not all of them even complete, but they speak. In a way, you pull out a striped one worn at the ball of the foot, heel holding on with the determination of a soldier past his shift. The whole is no surprise. You've felt it forming for days, like a whisper of cold wine during your walks to the market. It's time. You thread your needle carefully, deliberately, the way your mother showed you, not to thick a thread, not to fine. Wool if possible, cotton in a pinch, and always double knot the end, unless you're a fan of trailing regrets. You slide the sock over your darning egg. It fits with a faint stretch, like a yawn. The hole spreads wide, the surrounding fabric curling slightly as if ashamed of its wound. But you're not here to scold, you're here to help. You start the vertical stitches first long, even, parallel, up, down, like counting breath, like brushing hair. Then the cross-hatching begins, over, under, a woven spell to hold the world together, and as you stitch, you hum. You don't mean to, it just happens, a wordless lullaby that matches the rhythm of your needle. Historians still argue whether darning songs existed formally, passed down like lullabies. But even if they weren't written down, the practice of humming while mending appears in letters, in poems, and if you know where to listen even in the pauses between heartbeats, you move on to the next sock, a child's, tiny blue, the heel's practically gone, but you'll try anyway. These are the hardest to part with, not because of their size, but because of who once fit inside them. And then there are the mismatched ones. Yes, the sock orphans. One red with a navy stripe, its mate lost to the laundry gods. Another gray, once elegant, now a lonely widower, you place them aside, not discarded, just waiting for fate to intervene, or for you to lose another sock and balance the equation. There's a superstition about lone socks, one that shows up in 18th century English farm journals. A lost sock, if buried beneath a stone, shall bring the other home. You tried it once. Nothing happened except you lost another pair. Perhaps the socks just wanted company underground. Sometimes you think about how long this tradition has lasted. In Rome, they wore foot wraps under sandals. In medieval Europe, socks were a luxury carefully knit, seldom replaced. In the trenches of World War I, soldiers prayed for socks as urgently as they prayed for letters. And in homes like yours, mending them was a silent act of resistance, a way of saying, we may not have much, but we take care of what we do have. The sun starts to rise. Light spills through the shutters in pale beams. The fire remains unlit. The basket is lighter now, fewer holes, fewer frayed edges. You hold up your work to the window. The mended heel glows like stained glass, imperfect but whole. You place the socks, folded neatly, on the shelf near the hearth, the top pair mended, warm by your lap, deserve pride of place. Fringe researchers speculate that in some households, socks were passed from generation to generation, darned until no original thread remained, like a ship repaired plank by plank. At what point is it the same sock? Does it matter? You stretch your arms, wipe your eyes, the room is still quiet. The day hasn't begun its loudness yet, and in this pocket of peace, surrounded by soft wool and slower breath, you realize mending is not just about utility, it's about refusal. To give up on something just because it's broken, to pretend that comfort can only be bought new, to forget that hands can heal. You place the needle back in its tin, close the basket, and whisper softly without irony, thank you, because these socks walked with you, and now they'll walk with you again. You're on your knees beside your grandmother's cedar chest, the one that creaks ominously every time it's opened, as if warning you that it contains not just keepsakes, but time itself. Inside, beneath a folded shawl and an envelope labeled button collection, do not throw out again, lies something precious, her darning egg. It's smooth and pale with a worn groove along the side, polished not by sandpaper, but by generations of fingers, thumbs, and the occasional frustrated fist. You lift it gently, cradling it like a fragile secret. It smells faintly of lavender and beeswax. To anyone else, it might look like a forgotten bit of clutter, a fancy wooden lump. But to those who know, to those who remember, it is a quiet tool of transformation. The darning egg is not an egg at all, of course. Not in the edible sense. It is round, sure, sometimes ovoid, sometimes mushroom-shaped, sometimes comically egg-like, but its purpose was never breakfast. It was repair, restoration, rebirth. Historians still argue over its precise origin. Some claim the earliest forms emerged in Tudor England, carved from dense fruitwood and tucked into sewing kits alongside bodkins and bone crochet hooks. Others point to Dutch households, where darning mushrooms were turned on family lathes and passed down with embroidered handkerchiefs and the occasional unspoken grudge. Your grandmother's came from the Baltic coast. At least, that's what she claimed, though her stories had a way of changing slightly depending on the weather or who was asking. Some days the egg belonged to her grandmother, who darned through winters so cold the ink froze in wells. Other days it was found at a market stall for 3 buttons and a smile. But it was always present, always used, always spoken to softly. You turn the egg in your hands, feel its grain. One side is chipped slightly, perhaps from a dropped needle, perhaps from a moment of anger, when a heel tore again after being mended twice. The egg remembers. You can feel it. Darning without an egg is possible. But it's like writing with a broken pen. Yes, you can do it, but you won't like it. The egg provides shape, tension, a gentle opposition. You stretch the sock over it, and the whole becomes a canvas, not a failure. There's poetry in that. French scholars have written essays, yes, essays on darning egg symbolism. They speak of it as an object of domestic empowerment, a literal and metaphorical support for women's labor, a passive participant in centuries of quiet repair. Others call it mundane and shrug. But you know better. You remember how she used to hold it, tucking the sock over it with the same care you'd use to swaddle a kitten. She never rushed, even when the bread was burning, even when the dog was barking. The egg came first. Because when you cared for your socks, you were also caring for yourself. You dig further into the chest and find the small tin that always sat beside it. Inside, needles, some rusted with time, others still sharp enough to threaten egos, and a few colors of thread brown, navy, gray, nothing fancy, nothing bright. These were work socks, life socks. Celebration was reserved for the occasional red trim or a cheerful patch from leftover fabric. You pull out a brown sock from your pocket. Its heel is worn through. Again, it's the same one you mended last season. It's lower, like that failing in the same place, as if giving you another chance to do it better. You place the egg inside to adjust the fabric until the whole sits perfectly centered and begin stitching. There's no rush. That's the rule. Up, down, across, under, over. Thread weaves like a conversation. The egg, silent and patient, supports each move. You wonder quietly, because this is the time for quiet, how many socks it has helped, how many steps, trudges, dances, and escapes it has protected. And you wonder how many voices it has heard. Did your grandmother whisper to it? Did her mother hum lullabies as she stitched? Did they curse when the thread tangled? You do. Frequently, the egg is steady, always steady. You finish the patch, run your fingers across it. It's not invisible, but it's strong and strangely beautiful. The new threads glimmer faintly in the light, like spider silk laced through memory. You slip off the sock, fold it neatly, place the egg beside it, and for just a moment you whisper, "Thank you." It's silly, maybe, but not really. You're not thanking wood. You're thanking time, hands, all the quiet care that brought you to this moment. In this room, with this small, beautiful skill, historians still debate whether darning eggs were essential or sentimental. You know they were both. You're 10 years old again. Legs dangling off the edge of a kitchen bench that smells faintly of yeast, smoke, and the faint metallic tang of old needles. The light is dim, it always is, and the only thing louder than the tick of the wall clock is the soft creak of your grandmother's rocking chair as she works. Socks stretch over her darning egg like a tiny drum. She doesn't talk much while she darns. It's not a loud activity, but there's communication in it, all the same, in the way she nods to herself when a row of stitches goes straight, in the way she squints, leans closer, and mutters a phrase in a dialect you barely understand when she hits a knot, in the way she always smooths the mended spot and whispers so faintly you think you might have imagined it. That's better, little one. This was how people learned to mend socks, not with lessons, but with presence. There were no formal classes, no diagrams, no beginner kits. There was just time, a warm room, and someone patient enough to let you watch. You remember reaching out once, clumsy fingers grasping at the needle. She didn't stop you. She just moved slower. Let you feel the rhythm, over, under, pull, tighten, breathe. Historians still argue whether domestic arts like darning were considered teachable skills or simply absorbed through proximity. Diaries suggest it was mostly the latter. A girl might spend her whole childhood watching her aunt or mother stitch holes without ever being formally taught. Then one day, when she tried it herself, the rhythm would already live in her hands. You tried to mimic that rhythm later in your own socks. You still do. Even now, older, with your own chair and your own thread. 10. You find yourself rocking just slightly as you work, not for comfort, not on purpose, but because the body remembers, and not just the body, the tools, too. The same needles, bent ever so slightly from decades of work, the same darning egg, now with a fresh scratch from where it fell off the table last week. The same threads, some bought, some harvested from unraveling others' socks, because waste was never part of the plan. Fringe historians have suggested that the darning process was often an act of storytelling, even if no words were said, that as mothers and grandmothers stitched, they passed on more than technique, they passed on memory. You believe it. You remember clearly the socks your grandmother kept in a special drawer, not because they were the newest or warmest, but because she had mended them the most. She would smile, shake her head, and say, "That old gray pair's more patch than sock, but it still knows how to keep secrets." You weren't sure what she meant at the time. You are not. Each patch, each woven stitch is a conversation between the past and the present, between labor and love, between the whole and the hand that fills it. There's one pair in your drawer now, navy blue, barely holding together. You've patched them 7 times. The toe is a quilt, the heel is a battleground, but they're your favorites, not because they're softest, they're not. Not because they're stylish, absolutely not, but because they've lasted, because you've lasted. You remember teaching someone else once, a friend, not a close one, just someone who didn't want to throw away a sock that meant something. You sat beside them, handed them the egg, and said nothing for 5 minutes while they stabbed the air in confusion. Then you gently turned the sock, repositioned the thread, and waited. Eventually they found the rhythm. You didn't praise, you didn't critique. You just rocked the chairs softly, steadily, because that's how you were taught, and that's how the skill survives. In kitchens, in corners, in quiet laps and long afternoons, no fanfare, just presence, just patience. Just a rocking chair and a whisper, "That's better, little one." By the time socks made it to the trenches, they had become more than simple garments. They were lifelines, woolen shields against mud, frostbite, and the gnawing homesickness that haunted every damp, rattling breath of war. It's early morning in 1916, somewhere in France. Rain drizzles in like a habit. Soldiers are waking. if they ever really slept. A young man pulls on his boots slowly, reluctantly, and underneath them socks, thick wool, hand-knit, slightly too tight at the toes, and at the heel a patch. A careful square of brown thread stitch with the quiet love of someone hundreds of miles away. He doesn't remember her name exactly, some church woman back in Yorkshire who'd sign the note, "Keep your toes warm, lad," but the stitch is neat, steady, like a heartbeat. These weren't just socks anymore, they were symbols. Darned socks had become acts of resistance. Historians have catalogued entire warehouses of war donations, rows and rows of mended socks sorted by size, bundled by weight, shipped in crates that smelled of cedar and ink and wool. Women's groups across Britain, Canada, America, and beyond gathered in church basements, schoolrooms, and parlors, not just to knit, but to mend, because knitting a new sock takes time darning. However, that was immediate, practical, fast. They sat in circles, gray hair and freckled hands, talking softly, passing baskets, swapping thread. Sometimes they sang, sometimes they just mended in silence. The only sound the soft puncture of needle through cloth. Fringe researchers call these wartime circles functional fellowship, a kind of tactical tenderness in response to a brutal world. When you couldn't hold your son or brother or husband, you could still hold his sock, still send a piece of warmth forward through the fog. Imagine that. A row of women, needles flashing under weak lamplight, mending socks that had already seen one winter and were destined for another. Not glamorous, not noble, but necessary. There's a letter from 1917, found in the pocket of a fallen soldier. It reads, "Tell her the socks made it. My toes are still warm. No name, no address. Just that small, strange, enormous gratitude." Back home, the menders weren't immune to the symbolism either. They wrote poems. They embroidered initials into the cuffs. They told jokes about socks seeding their own toes. And yes, sometimes quietly. When no one was looking, they whispered goodnight to the pairs before sending them off. Like a small prayer tucked into wool. One diary entry from a woman named Louisa in Devonshire reads, "I patched a sock that had been patched 3 times already. I felt like I was touching his steps, like I was helping him walk just a little farther." You don't hear that kind of history in the textbooks. You don't see it on the monuments, but it matters. Because for every helmet shined and every rifle cleaned, there was someone darning socks, keeping the feet moving, keeping the march possible. And after the war, many of those socks came home tattered, yes, faded, reeking of trench mud and lye soap, but still whole, still wearable. And some people couldn't bear to part with them. They folded them gently, placed them in drawers, kept them under beds, not to wear again, but to remember, because those socks had survived, and they had brought someone home. You think about that sometimes when you mend, how each stitch is more than repair. It's a vote for continuation, a way of saying you still have steps to take. Today, when socks tear, they're tossed, too cheap to fix, too easy to replace. But once they were fixed because they mattered, because someone did the walking and someone else did the watching, because darning a sock was, in its own humble way, a kind of love letter. You sit back now, your own needle paused, a half-done patch in your lap, and you wonder, what if we still saw things that way? What if we still stitched our care into fabric? What if we still whispered goodnight to the things that carried us? Let's visit the sock drawer, not yours, maybe not the one with the balled-up gem socks, and that one pair that's been mysteriously alone since 2022, but a sock drawer from a different time, a quieter one, a drawer not just filled with fabric, but with a kind of reverence, a place where softness lived, folded into careful bundles, each one telling a small story about hands, homes, and heel patches. The act of putting socks away used to mean something, not because socks were sacred exactly, but because they were necessary. They were hard-earned, hard-kept. Each pair you owned had been through something, worked in a field, danced in a parlor, worn through during a walk you didn't want to take, but did anyway. And because they were mended again and again, they stayed, and when you finally retired them, you didn't just toss them away, you gave them a place. There's an old journal entry from 1879 in rural Pennsylvania. A woman writes, "Put away the green pair, as the heel won't take another stitch. Wrapped them in muslin and left them with the child's christening gown." Imagine that, a sock sharing a drawer with memory. Historians still debate the symbolism of these sock drawers. Were they practical? Certainly, but also emotional, undeniably. A well-worn, well-mended sock was like a quiet badge of perseverance. Some people wrapped them in cloth, others tucked small notes inside them, like apologies or thank yous. Some placed them with lavender sprigs or orange peel, not just to scent them, but to honor them. You sit with that thought for a moment. What if your sock drawer were more like a cabinet of tiny altars? One drawer for walking, one for dancing, one for grieving, one for snow, each pair carrying its weight, gently folded beside its purpose. You think of your grandmother again, the way she folded socks heel to toe, never bald. She said it kept them from forgetting who they were as a child. That sounded silly. As an adult, it sounds like something you might whisper to a patch of thread. Don't forget who you're made for. There's even evidence scattered across letters and oral histories that some folks spoke to their socks when putting them away. They'd say things like, "Good job today," or "You held up better than I expected," or simply "Rest now." It wasn't magic. Not really, just mindfulness, attention, a small moment of softness in a world that rarely offered it. Fringe scholars might laugh at that. Socks, after all, are humble things. They're not heirlooms or centerpieces or symbols of state, but that's exactly why they matter. Because if you can find meaning in the thing you wear between your foot and your boot, if you can honor that, then maybe you're the kind of person who finds beauty everywhere. There are sock drawers in museums now, tucked away, rarely displayed, containing pieces of lace-trimmed ankle socks from the 1700s, wool hiking socks from the 1940s, silk ones with barely their repairs and shades of thread no longer manufactured. They lie there, not flashy, but they hold centuries of breath, steps, and hands that tried to keep things going. You return to your own drawer metaphorically or literally and take stock. Maybe there's a pair in there you could mend. Maybe there's one too far gone to save, but too sweet to throw away. Maybe, just maybe, there's one you want to fold gently and say, "Thank you for walking with me." So tonight, before you fall asleep, consider this. Open your imaginary sock drawer. Greet the pairs that got you through hard days, the ones that never matched, the ones that kept your toes warm in the worst of winters, the ones you wore while pacing while dancing, while just trying to be okay. Fold them with intention. Whisper them good night, if you like. It's not about socks. It never really was. It's about honoring the wear and choosing again and again to care. You reach into the back of your closet and find it a lone sock, soft, a little stiff with time, faintly speckled with lint and mystery. Its mate, long gone, disappeared into the folds of time, or perhaps the underworld behind the washing machine. You hold it up. It curls slightly, like it's shy. You laugh, but gently, because this is not an unusual sight. No matter the century, the missing sock has been humanity's most consistent disappearing act. And yet what happens to the one left behind? You've heard the legends, maybe even whispered one yourself. In 18th century Scotland, it was said that if you buried a lone sock under your doorstep and stopped 3 times, the other would return. In parts of rural Italy, widowed socks were tied to window latches and left overnight, an invitation for their partner to find their way home. In some Baltic fishing villages, people tossed unmatched socks into the sea with a kiss and a coin. So they'll walk in the waves together, they said. Historians still haven't quite agreed on when socks became mystical. Maybe it was when they became precious, difficult to own, harder to replace. But even now, the missing sock feels like a quiet betrayal. You gave them both your trust. You washed them, folded them, walked entire days in them, then poof, one goes rogue. And yet some people kept the remaining sock, refused to give it up, not out of denial, but defiance. There's a diary entry from 1903, buried the blue wool sock beneath the pomegranate tree. I do not expect its mate, but I do expect kindness. Kindness, that's what this is, isn't it? A willingness to care for the half, even when the whole is lost. Do you think about your own lone socks? Some have been waiting for years, in drawers, in baskets, stuffed in the back of cabinets like forgotten letters. And then there are those who take things further, who reinvent the solo sock, turn it into a dust rag, a pouch for loose buttons, a makeshift puppet for entertaining restless children. There's joy in that, too, a new story, a second chance. But for the most sentimental among us, the ritual is different. You take the sock just one and fold it neatly, no partner, no purpose, just presence. And then you whisper good night to it. Silly? Maybe, but so was the idea of keeping broken pots once. So was writing poetry about a cracked bowl. And yet, those small acts remind us that nothing is too small to deserve tenderness. Fringe scholars have argued that the lone sock phenomenon mirrors deeper human truths: longing, separation, grief, maybe even acceptance. After all, isn't it deeply human to mourn the matching, to hold space for what's gone, even when it was just a small woolen companion? Some people even stitch tiny monograms into solo socks memorials of a sort. Others kept a basket labeled wandering partners, waiting with hope. A few simply placed the lone sock on a shelf and looked at it now and then, not with sadness, just with memory. You return to your sock, still curled, still waiting. You fold it, you place it gently with others, and you tell it quietly, you did well. Thank you. It doesn't answer, but somehow you feel lighter. You don't have to fix everything. You don't have to pair every thread. Sometimes it's enough to honor what remains, to keep a place even for the missing, to fold the worn heel, to whisper good night, and to know not everything has to be whole to be loved. The drawer creaks softly as you open it, not because it's broken, but because it has learned patience. Inside, folded in neat little bundles, are socks that no longer have mates, socks that were patched one too many times, socks with patterns faded into mystery. Some are barely socks anymore, just ghosts of them, fragments of what once kept someone warm. You pause over one in particular, a soft woolen thing, gray with a patch of dark blue on the heel. It's fraying at the edge now, unraveling slightly like it's trying to tell you something. You lift it, press the toe between your fingers, and remember. This was the pair you wore during that long winter, wasn't it? The one where the pipes froze and the windows frosted from the inside. You had a cold that lasted weeks, and these socks were what kept your feet from forgetting they belonged to someone. The memory is strange, soft-edged. You don't remember the meals, or the days, or the newspaper headlines. You remember the socks. You set it down gently, add it to a new pile. Tonight is for farewells. Some things cannot be mended, not because we lack skill, but because they've already given everything they had. A heel that's more patch than original, a toe that's thinned into gauze, a cuff that refuses to cling. These socks have walked as far as they can. But we don't toss them, we fold them one last time. Historians often overlook this part of domestic ritual, the quiet sorting, the soft goodbye to fabric that served its time. Yet in so many cultures, there's a wordless reverence for worn-out things. Tools, brushes, wooden spoons, and yes, even socks. They aren't discarded, they're retired, honored, released. In one small village in the Alps, there's a tradition of lining old socks on a windowsill for one final sunrise. In parts of Japan, aged cloth is offered to the local shrine, a gesture of thanks, and in rural France, there are stories of socks being tied to the rafters of barns, so the mice will know kindness. You wonder, what is the right way to say goodbye to a sock? Some people cut them into ribbons to use as ties for herb bundles. Others stitch them into patchwork, a memory quilt of feet and frost. A few simply place them in the garden, where they slowly return to the soul, one fiber at a time. You reach for your needle, not to mend this time, but to sign on the toe of the old sock. You stitch a single thread in the shape of a tiny star. It's crooked. It doesn't matter. It's your way of saying, I see you. You fold it carefully, not hurriedly, the way you might fold a letter, or a promise, or a story with no ending. You place it in the farewell box, a modest wooden thing you found at a flea market. It smells like pine and a little regret. Inside are buttons that no longer match anything, bits of thread, a short to save, shards of broken ceramic from a teacup you loved and dropped. A quiet archive of care. You sit back, breathe. Fringe scholars sometimes refer to these rituals as soft archiving, acts of domestic preservation that don't intend to be remembered by history, but rather remembered by you. That is enough. Outside, the wind picks up. A branch scrapes the roof like someone dragging their hand across a page. You listen, not to the wind, to the drawer, to the box, to the thread between your thumb and forefinger. They're saying thank you, or maybe you are, because these socks didn't just carry your feet. They carried your grief, your worrying, your whispered laughter at the end of long days. They were with you when no one else was, and now they can rest. So, tonight, as you lay your own socks beside the bed warm, patched, still holding whisper to them to ... tell them they've done enough. And maybe, just maybe, they'll whisper back, "You never meant to become sentimental about socks," and yet here you are sitting cross-legged on a creaky floor surrounded by little bundles of yarn-soft history, organizing a lifetime into rows of worn toes and quiet heels. These are not just clothes, they're artifacts, and tonight you're curating your own museum of the mended. There's the pair you wore on the day you moved out brown, too tight but brave. You remember them because they left little ridges around your calves, and because you sat on the bus watching the trees blur, thinking, "I hope I packed enough." You didn't, but the socks made it. There's the black pair with the stitched red X on the heel. Not a decoration, but a marker. You used to sew an X every time you patched the same spot more than twice. That one has three. A triple survivor. You reach for another. A delicate gray ankle sock with fine floral embroidery near the cuff, once white, now the color of old clouds. You'd forgotten about these. They were a gift. Years ago, you wore them only on Sundays, as if they were listening to hymns. You placed them aside, a pile just for sentimental stitches. Historians often overlook this part of life, not war, not politics, but the slow sorting of personal textiles. But some letters, some inventories, some passing footnotes reveal everything. A woman in 1812 listing 3 pairs of mended stockings, one kept for Sunday best. A boy in 1909 who refused to throw away his lucky socks even when the toes became ridden. A man in 1933 who buried a pair beside his dog. You think about writing a little label for each sock. This one comforted me when I couldn't sleep. This one walked every step of a breakup. This one was there the day I forgave myself. No one would read them, but maybe they don't need to. You pick up a sock that feels more air than cloth. You try holding it up to the light, its size. You laugh, you patch it one last time, not for utility, but out of respect. And then you find something odd, something you haven't seen in years. A sock with no hole. You turn it in your hands, top to toe, inside out. It's intact, fully whole, barely worn. You frown, and then you realize it was a spare, an emergency sock tucked away and forgotten. It never had its moment, never wrapped around a foot, never stepped in snow, never curled around a tired heel. It's just pristine. You set it down like a letter that was never mailed. It's strange, isn't it, how the untouched things feel less meaningful than the mended ones, how perfection somehow less alive. Fringe scholars call this the paradox of preservation, that we treasure the worn and worrying over the new. That a sock with 6 repairs holds more spirit than one never used. You consider wearing it tomorrow, giving it a story, or maybe stitching a line of red thread down the side, just so it doesn't feel left out. The drawer is almost full now, each sock folded with intention, some to keep, some to let go, a few to rest in the quiet drawer of memory. You close the lid softly, like closing a chapter, not with sadness, with completion. And maybe that's what darning has always been about, not just extending the life of a sock, but giving a place to your steps, creating a thread between days, making meaning, not from newness, but from care. You sit back, stretch your fingers, and listen to the creak of the floor beneath you. You whisper, "Goodnight," to the drawer, to the socks, to yourself. and everything you've carried. Sometimes a sock lives longer than a promise you wouldn't expect it. Socks wear out, right? They fade, they tear, they vanish into the mouths of laundry machines with a kind of sock-specific mischief. But every so often, one remains. One stubborn, soft creature that just keeps holding on. This one sits in your drawer like a monument, cream-colored, with faint navy stripes around the ankle. The stripes are uneven now, faded from years of washing and life, but still there, like ghosts of intention. It used to have a mate, you both did. You remember when it was gifted, wrapped in brown paper, tied with string, a birthday present, or maybe an apology. You can't recall the words said, but you remember the warmth in your hands, the weight of it, the sincerity woven into the wool. You both wore them, one pair, to people, matching in a way that felt like hope years past. The socks saw travels, dinners, the endless ordinary days where nothing dramatic happens, just small, golden routines. Tea mugs, mismatched spoons, rain on the sill, things that never get mentioned in journals but matter. One sock was lost somewhere between a move and a mistake. The other stayed. You almost threw it out once. Almost, but your hand couldn't do it. Not yet. So it sat in a drawer, then a box, then the bottom of a closet, folded, quiet, whole. Historians rarely record the afterlives of textiles. They might tell us what socks were made of, where they were worn, how they were dyed, but not what they witnessed, not who they belonged to, not what they meant. And yet, in letters, in diaries, in side comments on estate inventories, we get flickers. A woman in 1928 writes, "I wear his sock to bed, still smells of cedar, still mine." A man in 1954 kept one of hers. It fits badly, but the memory fits well. Even now, there are people wearing partnerless socks, not out of laziness or forgetfulness, but remembrance. Because one sock can carry more than heat. It can carry presence. You take the cream and navy sock from its place. Hold it to your chest. It's just wool, just thread, just a thing. And yet, your breath softens. The room is quieter. You almost hear laughter from another room. See an old coffee cup, chip just so. Feel someone's hand brushing yours as they pull the socks from the line. You sit and darn, not because the sock needs it's in perfect shape, but because you need it, a small act of love, a way of saying you're still with me, and every step I take you reinforce the heel, add a stitch to the cuff, thread navy into the stripes like a whisper, still here. You don't cry, not tonight, not exactly. But your fingers move slower, your breath is quieter. Fringe scholars say objects carry energy, but you don't need a theory. You just need this sock. You fold it when you're done, lay it flat. Smooth the fabric as if smoothing time itself, and then, because no one's watching, you kiss the toe. You whisper, "Thank you for staying." You close the drawer, and you sleep. You dream of stitches, not dramatic dreams, not battles or flying or teeth falling out, just rows and rows of thread, moving rhythmically through soft, worn fabric, a needle gliding like a whisper, patching quiet holes in memory. When you wake, the world is gray with early morning light. It's the sort of day where the sky never quite commits to being sunny, and the floor is colder than it should be. You wrap yourself in a shawl, shuffle across the room, and reach instinctively for your thickest, most faithful socks. They're there, right where you left them. They weren't always yours. Originally, they belonged to someone else, someone who left them behind one rainy afternoon. You offered to return them. They told you to keep them. They already like your feet better, they said with a crooked smile. That was years ago. Since then, you've mended the heel twice, restitched the cuff after a stray nail tore through the edge, washed them more times than you can count, each time with a sense of trepidation as if the machine might suddenly realize what it's holding and decide to keep them for itself. They're your favorite now, not because they're the softest, not because they're the warmest, but because they stayed. Some socks carry people with them. Fringe scholars have coined terms like memory textiles, objects that become containers for the sensory residue of people we love. The way a certain scarf smells like your mother's perfume, the way a sweater reminds you of your brother's laugh, or, in this case, the way these socks feel like a quiet kind of company. You sit in your chair and pull them on. They hug your feet like an old story. No fireworks, no drama. Just the exact weight of belonging. You pour a mug of something hot tea, maybe, or coffee, or just warm water with lemon, the kind of drink that exists solely to be held. You sip and think about all the socks you've known. The thick ones you wore on camping trips, the thin ones that unraveled after one wear, the ones you borrowed and never gave back, the ones you gave away, the ones you wore on hard days, the ones that made you feel, for a few brief steps, like you might be okay. You look down now at your mended pair. The stitches hold, the fabric is thinned in places, but reliable. The toes are intact. You'll need to reinforce the left cuff soon. You make a mental note, and then, because you're still not quite ready to start the day, you open the sock drawer just to look. They're all there. The pairs you folded with care, the single socks still waiting, the retired but not forgotten pile, the mended, the soft, the ridiculous ones with little embroidered ducks. Each one a mile walked, a moment remembered. You pull one out at random. It's an old brown one with a blue heel. The heel was your first real repair. You'd panicked, stabbed yourself twice, and ended up with a patch that looked more like a burlap maze than anything tidy. But it held, it still holds. You smile, fold it, tuck it back in. Historians rarely catalog domestic pride. They focus on architecture, warfare, politics. But here, in this drawer, is something just as enduring: small triumphs. You finish your drink, stand, stretch. The day ahead is waiting, its list, its clatter, its quiet exhaustion. But your feet are warm. Your socks are strong. You've carried history on your solace, repaired it with your fingers, honored it with every fold. And you are ready, almost. Just one more minute, one more low, one more whispered thank you. The day moves around you, not through you. Around you like river water parting at your ankles. You've done the chores, answered the questions, crossed things off lists that seemed longer yesterday. You've walked, sat, stood, cooked, thought, and quietly questioned your entire purpose while peeling an apple, a perfectly ordinary day. And yet your socks are still on, still holding, still with you. You notice it sometime in the late afternoon, when the light has softened and the room tilts gently into that golden hour hush. You look down, and there they are, slightly slouched at the ankle, but loyal, familiar. The wool is warm, the mend is holding, and the small ridge where you stitched the heel feels like a hand resting against your foot. There's comfort in that. You think about how easy it is to forget things that were. You only notice the broken ones, the missing, the things that failed. But this sock, you mended it a year ago, and it has done its job so well since you nearly forgot it had ever been broken. There's a metaphor there. You smile. Maybe you are a sock. Fringe writers, not quite scholars, not quite poets, have started calling mended socks a form of functional intimacy, a place where repair becomes a quiet language of affection, like washing someone's favorite mug by hand, or turning off the hallway light because you know they always forget. You wiggle your toes. The sock wrinkles slightly, responds, lives. You wonder what else you've quietly mended lately. Not with thread, maybe, but with time, with small choices, with silence. There's a friend you called again, even though the conversation was strange. A book you picked up after letting it gather dust. A window you finally opened. Sometimes repair is unannounced. No ceremony, no applause, just showing up again. Later, while folding laundry, you find another pair of your walking socks, the ones with the reinforced toe and the stripe on the cuff. You smile at them the way someone smiles at an old map. They've been places. You remember one walk in particular, long road, blister forming, 1,000 thoughts, none of them gentle. You kept going. So did the socks. You got home. So did they. And so you fold them slowly, not with reverence, with recognition. That's what darning teaches. After all, not just how to fix, but how to see the value in the worn, to see the worth of repetition, to see that holding on softly, gently, patiently is its own kind of art. You sit back, look around, breathe. Your feet are warm. The drawer is full. The world is still unraveling in places, but you know how to thread the needle. You pick up your darning kit, the egg, the needle, a new patch of thread and a color you've never used before, teal. Maybe. Just for fun. Just because not every mend has to match. You pull a sock from the almost pile, a hole near the toe, small, neat. You smile, you whisper, I've seen worse. The stitch begins, up, dot, down, across, under. You a little. The same tune as always. The room is quiet. The day is done. And the story continues, not with a bang, but with a stitch. It's nearing evening again. That gentle folding of the sky into lavender and charcoal, when the air slows down and even the birds forget what they were so urgently chirping about all day. You light a small lamp just like they use to, not for brightness it barely flickers past your elbows, but for ritual, for warmth, for continuity. On the table before you sits a modest pile, socks in various states of readiness, some whole, some wounded, some already halfway into the afterlife of drawer lining or lavender sachets. And in the center, a single sock resting patiently atop your mending egg, like a tired child waiting for their story. You take a breath, thread your needle, and begin. It's slow work, gentle, the kind of slowness you don't fight against. You don't hurry the thread. You let it find its rhythm. It moves like thought, looping, circling, doubling back. You're not just fixing a hole. You're having a conversation with where. You're saying, I noticed, I care, I'm here. Historians sometimes describe this act as domestic mindfulness, though the people who did it wouldn't have called it that. They didn't need a term, they just knew that in the quiet moments, in the pauses between work and sleep, There was time to tend to things that mattered then, to things that had been taken for granted. You stitch the horizontal rows now, weaving the second layer of the mend over, under. You can feel the tension change slightly in the thread, like it's settling in. And then, without meaning to, you start whispering. Not words, not sentences, just sounds, breathy syllables shaped more like lullabies than speech. It's instinctive. Maybe muscle memory, maybe heart memory. You think of the letters, you read those tiny excerpts from other centuries. A line here, a fragment there. Sang to my socks tonight, one woman wrote in 1864. Her ink blotting the word tonight as if even the page wasn't ready to admit it. Another whispered them rest. They've earned it. You used to laugh at those. But not anymore. Now they feel true. You glance at the other socks in the pile, the mended, the unmatched, the faithful. Each one still carrying traces of movement, of days paced, steps taken, thresholds crossed. Each one a reminder that even in the mundane, there's grace. You finish the patch, tie the knot, smooth the fabric with your thumb. It's not perfect, but it's firm, kind it will hold, and then, almost shyly, you whisper, "Good Job." The sock doesn't answer. It doesn't need to. Fringe researchers have explored this moment, this ritual, the thank you. They found echoes of it in oral histories, poems, even old household ledgers, where women noted socks with small hearts or stars in the margins, not for fashion, but for affection, because sometimes the people who wore those socks were no longer around, and all that remained was what had been mended, what had been kept. You fold the sock, tuck it in with the others, add a sprig of lavender, because you've grown to like the way it softens the drawer. You close it slowly, the lamp flickers, your hands rest. You think quietly about what else you might tend to tomorrow. Another sock, a sweater, maybe. A letter half-written, a friendship gone quiet. There's always something to mend, always something worth returning to. And in this gentle practice, you've found something rare. Not just memory, not just comfort, but peace. By now the drawer feels like a diary, not one written in ink or bound in leather, but in threads and folds, in soft creases and quiet decisions. Every sock within it is an entry, a moment, a confession that says, I kept this, I fixed this, I didn't give up on this, and tonight you're adding one more. You hold it up to the lamplight. It's nothing special, really. Plain gray wool, a little thin at the arch. The toe is soft with age, the heel slightly glazed from use. You run your thumb along the edge, feeling not the wear, but the story. This one was with you during the long walk home after that very long conversation. The one where nothing was solved, but silence wasn't empty, it was full of effort. You remember the gravel crunching beneath your boots, the way the sock bunched a little at the ankle, the way you kept walking anyway. It deserves a patch. You slide the darning egg into place. The hole is small, almost not worth the trouble. But you know better. The hole is a whisper now, not a scream. That's the best time to mend. As you begin stitching, your eyes drift across the drawer. Now fuller than ever, you wonder if you'll ever use them all again. Some are simply their memory socks, tokens, emotional artifacts. Others are still active duty, everyday heroes. You smile, thinking of that one striped pair that always slips down, but never quits. There's a strange sense of abundance in it, not from having too many socks, but from having so many stories you were willing to hold on to. So many threads you refused to let fray into oblivion. Fringe folklorists have written about this tendency, not hoarding exactly, not collecting either, something gentler. They call it quiet preservation, a phrase for those who don't throw things out when they break, who whisper, instead, "I'll see what I can do." You pause your stitching for a moment. Let the thread dangle. Think of how many generations did this exact thing, not on a stage, not with applause, just in a warm room with a bent needle, a soft sock, a steady hand. They didn't know they were making history. They were just making repairs, and that's the beauty of it. History doesn't always come in revolutions. Sometimes it comes in a thread pulled tight, a heel patch before it splits, a pair of socks passed down with a smile that says, "These still work." You finish the mend. It's a little lumpy, slightly crooked. You love it. You fold the sock heel in, toe down, smooth but not tight. You place it on top of the drawer stack like a period at the end of a soft-spoken sentence. Then you notice something, a single thread on your lap. It's from a sock you patched last week. It stuck to your sleeve, clung to your cuff, traveled through the house without your knowing. You lift it. It glints a little in the lamplight. Still strong, still useful. You don't throw it away. You wind it gently around your finger and tuck it into the edge of the drawer. A keepsake, a thread of a thread. Proof that something held. Even when no one was looking, you blow out the lamp. The darkness is soft, not empty, full of warm toes and settled hearts, and as you lie down, you pull the blanket up and whisper not to anyone in particular, but to everything around you, "Well done," because in a world that wears, you repaired, and that counts for something. It's nearly the end now. The drawer is closed, the light is low, and your hands are resting in your lap. Darning needle finally set aside like a soldier, loud to sleep. There's only one pair left on the table, folded, familiar. You know it by touch alone, soft as breath, worn at the edges, but whole. You patched it last month, a neat crosshatch on the ball of the foot. It held beautifully. You haven't worn them since, not because you're saving them, but because they feel complete, as if their purpose is no longer to walk, but simply to remind you some things can be made right again. You lift them, they feel warm, even though the room has grown cool. There's something ceremonial in how you fold them heel over toe. Cuff smooth, you take your time not because you need to, but because you want to, because this isn't a sock anymore. Not just. It's a symbol, a quiet one, a private one the world wouldn't notice, but you do. You remember the first hole you ever tried to mend, the way the thread tangled, the way your hands shook, the way the fabric bunched like it was mocking you. You almost gave up. You didn't, and now here you are all these moons later, all these days and years and walks and weathers, a person who tends, who keeps, who repairs. Fringe thinkers, those lovely, soft-voiced scholars on the outer edge of academia, have sometimes suggested that darning socks is a metaphor for how we love. Not loudly, not perfectly, but repeatedly. You return to the same spot again and again. You check for weak points. You reinforce them. You forgive the damage. You try again. And again and again you place the final pair back into the drawer, the sock drawer that now holds more than cloth. It holds the days you survived, the comfort you earned, the people you walked beside. It holds the quiet evidence that you showed up even when things unraveled. Even when life wore you thin, even when the steps were lonely or the heel was raw, you stitch your way forward, and now the drawer is full, not in the cluttered sense, but in the satisfied sense, the kind of full that says enough. You've done enough for today. You close it gently, you stretch, you breathe, outside. The night wraps the world like a shawl, even the moon seems quieter. You slide your own socks off slowly like a gesture of reverence. You fold them and place them beside the bed, not tossed, not forgotten, just resting. And for a moment, just one, you press your fingers to the worn heel and say, "Thank you," not because the sock needs to hear it, but because you do. You lie back, the day sighs closed, the stitches hold, and sleep comes gently like wool.